and gentlemen, welcome to the Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. And here's your host, Alan Mosley.
You didn't say the word.
I know, I didn't say the word.
You've already ruined the
I
episode.
don't know. I didn't say it. Well, you know.
Do it again. Do it
No.
again.
Okay. What?
Okay.
Do the same thing over again?
Yeah, do it again.
Okay.
Okay.
Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Gold Standard with Alan Mosley, the live version. Okay. Live on Facebook. Here we go.
Hosted by Alan Mosley. That's right.
There it goes.
You know, Suzanne Sherman's already liked it.
Excellent.
That's a real friend right there. The friends who see it already know it's a train wreck, but they like it anyway.
Well, I sent her a check, so.
Well, they should do something. I actually have the stream right up here. So if you're not watching it live right now, if you're not watching this, I'm watching me live right now. How could you not be? Look at Suzanne Sherman joined the channel. You know, we'll be able to talk to people as we do this. But the camera's not on you, so people are like, who's Alan talking to right now? But we'll get to that in a second, because I have to fill up space, because poor Blake is running like 7 different instruments right now.
I am.
Yeah.
It's not my fault.
It's
Hey,
not
but
your
check
fault.
this out. Look, I can actually show you live. Look at that.
can?
That's you live. That's crazy. That's you live. Okay,
What?
so now you're back to you. Now you're live. Now it's you live. There's like an audio delay, so it's pretty weird.
Yeah, I just told Suzanne hello. So now we're gonna test to see if she's already left. She's just popping in to say hey. She's not gonna watch this garbage. But what we're actually doing is we're actually live on air, sharing the program to all of our various pages, and you know, you gotta do it.
Pretty cool.
You gotta do it.
Technology today.
How else will we know if Facebook is throttling our traffic? You know?
That becomes kind of obvious to you.
Yeah. You're kind of obvious.
I am very obvious.
All right, well, I think we're good. So can I do
Yeah,
the
we're good.
websites
You can
now,
do it
Blake?
now. You can
oh,
do
I
it.
can do the websites now?
You can do
Okay.
it.
Guys, thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of The Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. If you want to follow us on social media, you could do so. It is facebook.com/look, Blake, can you pull this up?
Look, check that out.
Look
It's
at
up.
this. Look,
It's cool.
facebook.com/TGSL.
This button
Blake
right
can't do
there. It is. Yes, there it is. Look at
There's
that.
me telling you about me in real time. Twitter is at Alan M.
Watch, I
Mosley.
can push this button. Whoa, check that out. That's so cool.
I don't see anything.
I know you don't.
okay.
But
Oh, there it is,
but
yeah.
everybody does.
And you don't have to do any of that, though,
Right.
actually. You can actually just go to our website, which is thegoldstandardpodcast.com.
Wow, check that out. That is
Look at
really
that.
cool.
That's pretty
and
cool.
it's kind of funny because it sort
It's
of
like
blew
I'm
you
pointing
up.
at it.
But you got like really big there.
I'm
Yeah.
touching it.
Well, now you're not because it's all good.
You got to fix that. Look at that. That's not right.
I know that's not right. That's something we'll fix later.
No, fix it right now. You have
Fix
to
it. How can I fix that?
Just resize the window. Blake,
Resize the window. Hold on, man. Slow down, dude.
this guy, Blake, by the way,
on,
we
where's
talked
the
about this
switch
last
at?
week. Blake's never watched this show before. He's never watched the Gold
Honestly, dude,
Standard in
I'm
his
like
life.
working on it. So what do? I go to.
Well, it doesn't matter now because
what?
now you're back to the other camera.
Okay, so all
We
right.
don't need it anymore.
Well, okay. Well, then let's just stay on this camera. and We'll figure that out later. Hopefully.
This is on your screen right now. If you're watching this, people are watching this.
People are watching this.
Oh,
It's a train
Suzanne
wreck.
said she shared it. So Suzanne
Oh
is
boy.
seeing this.
So at least we have somebody sharing it. That's
Yeah.
good.
A
Thank you,
person
Suzanne.
is watching this.
Awesome.
Thanks, Suzanne. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Shh, you're not here yet. Guys, let me introduce our guest for today.
Yes.
Who is a historian that I actually didn't discuss his bio with him before the show, so I don't really know how to introduce him, but he's a good friend of the show. He's a historian. He's also the author of, check this out, Compact of the Republic, The League of States and the Constitution by Dave Benner. This is my copy, right?
That's yours for
Wait.
life.
Hold on.
No interest.
Oh, he signed it.
He signed it.
I have a signed copy
Look at
of
that, man.
Compact of the Republic.
You should be impressed.
You should be impressed.
Yes.
Well, I mean, with the kind of quality of guests we can get on this show, you know,
Yeah.
we only settle for the best, and
That's right.
And that's Dave Benner.
That's right.
Dave
There
Benner,
you are.
welcome to the show.
There you
Thanks
are.
for having me, Alan. Appreciate it.
So, I had talked to you a few weeks back about coming on the show because all the way back last summer, we were going to do a big Lincoln Palooza episode, and we had a guest for that show, and I won't mention who it is, but they kind of ditched on us. If you can even imagine someone doing that to this program, they ditched on us. And so instead of just kind of winging it, we're like, we'll just shelve that whole idea until we can get somebody good on it. And then my friend, Mike Meharry, called me up and he said, Alan, I know of a racist neo-Confederate that would be exactly who you need.
Not what he said.
Okay, that's not what he said. But he said, here's a guy who's as good, if not better, than anybody on Lincoln, and it's Dave Benner.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, well, no. Don't think me. Think Mike Maharrey.
Yeah.
I think Mike Maharrey. You know, Mike Maharrey is actually the biggest contributor to the Gold Standard and has also made the most guest appearances on the show. You need to be on the next 6 weeks just to pass Mike and then retire.
I'll have to have a better track record than I have so far.
So we're gonna dive into Lincoln here, and you've already looked at my big long list of notes, but I'm gonna let you set the scene. What is today the anniversary of?
Yeah, today is the anniversary of Lincoln's decision to resupply Fort Sumter. This happened in April of 1861 after what we call Secession Winter. It was a time frame in which several states decided to secede from the Union. They formed individual conventions within their states and elected delegates to decide that question. Up until April, various members of Lincoln's cabinet had kind of mulled what to do and what kind of policy to follow after Lincoln's ascension. At one point, no one else other than Lincoln's Postmaster General thought it was wise to rearm the fort, and this is because it would have been interpreted by South Carolina as an incendiary action that violated what's called the Law of Nations. It's a typical set of norms that individual countries abided by to preserve peace. So that's where we're at.
So before we move on to other things, let's stay on Fort Sumter for just a second. Now, if I'm remembering my history correctly, which I'm probably not because I don't know anything, is delegates from South Carolina actually made their way to Washington, D.C. because they wanted to resolve the Sumter conflict diplomatically, but that wasn't in the cards. So what happened there?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The Lincoln administration's policy was such that they would not do anything that even remotely acknowledged the existence of this new government, this new union, the Confederacy, the Confederate States of America. However, Lincoln did make some communications with South Carolina's governor because he believed that, or he announced the fact that he didn't think that secession was legitimate. So his supposition was that South Carolina still remained in the Union. But as you alluded to, yes, the Confederate States of America tried to send some peace negotiators to Washington, D.C. to settle this thing peacefully, buy the federal forts from the federal government without going to any kind of, bloodshed or any kind of crisis like that. In fact, the head of the Army at the time, the celebrated and esteemed Winfield Scott, maybe the most revered person of his time in terms of military, said, "Let our wayward sisters go in peace." So war was not a foregone conclusion at this point.
Now that's interesting because I think that's where the point of contention is for a lot of people on the onset of the war is who instigated, right? And of course, yes, it may very well be true that troops in South Carolina fired on the fort. And if you take the literal pulling of a trigger to be the primary instigation of hostilities, if that's your definition, then sure. Yeah. But I think you and I would probably make the argument that, but instigation doesn't necessarily mean pulling a trigger. Instigation can be setting up the powder keg to blow, and that wasn't a Southern action. That was a Union action.
Yeah, I think you set this up perfectly. I would concede that. If that's your definition, I guess that's who started it. But according to all legal thought, drafted by Amir de Vital and Hugo Grotius around the Law of Nations, that wouldn't have been the only thing considered a war initiation action. Right?
So let's talk about Lincoln, the man, a little bit more specifically. And I wanted to share the story on air that I had a professor back in school when I was doing undergrad history. History 330, I think, was Civil War and Reconstruction. And my term paper for that class was about Lincoln. And the title was, because, you know me, I like to save the punchline for the end. So the title was Ending the Deification of Lincoln. And you can pretty much guess what the paper was about from that point. But the biggest criticism I got from the professor wasn't nitpicking any particular fact or figure in the paper. The criticism was, this is all well and good, but I feel like you're being overdramatic because that's been done. Like, the deification of Lincoln, as you call it, has already ended. People don't worship the man anymore, or any politician. Like his view is that this has already come to light, right? Like, this is historically accepted. What universe is this guy living in?
It's a good point. Tom DiLorenzo's famous book, The Real Lincoln, I think that came out in 2003. That was a breakthrough, and that did change some people's mind on Lincoln, including myself. But that is not the orthodox view that
Yes.
you get. It doesn't, supersede the Henry Jaffa vision of Lincoln, the battle cry of freedom narrative, Lincoln as the great emancipator and things like that. That is the version that children get in school.
Yeah, that's the analogy I use, is that is there literature out there that purports what we're talking about today? Well, yeah, it is, but I'm talking about what's the mainstream narrative. I mean, what do 250 Americans think? I don't think they believe along the lines of DiLorenzo.
That's right.
I don't think so.
I mean, he got just ransacked by the academic community
Yes.
after publishing that too, and it actually led him to publish a second book on Lincoln, Lincoln Unmasked, which answered some of his critics. So you're exactly right. That's how I see it as well.
Well, and there was one other little caveat that I wanted to add to that story, and it's something that I had tweeted back and forth with Brian McClanahan about. I had said to him once that I tried to quote him out of his book, The 9 Presidents That Screwed Up America and 4 That Tried to Save Her.
Great book.
Yeah, excellent book. And I mean, and obviously, I mean, is he a biased source? Of course he is. But I mean, I tend to think that's overrated. I think when people discuss, if we really want to get into the weeds of things here on the show, when people discuss like historiographical essays and things like that, I mean, what is any of it if not biased? I mean, I'm going to be biased that Hitler was bad. My mistake. I have that bias. I'm sorry.
I'm biased toward political decentralization,
Yeah,
so you're right.
yeah.
We all have
We have that. Yeah. And so the other thing that that this particular institution, I won't name who it is, but it was in the southern part of New Hampshire, is that they would try to limit your sources to what was in their database. And of course, they would make the argument that, well, this makes it easy on the professor. They can kind of check back behind you because they can just go to the database right behind you and look up the links, right? On the surface, that makes sense. But imagine my surprise when I don't find Thomas E. Woods Jr. in the database. I don't find Brian McClanahan.
Exactly.
I don't find, I don't even find Murray Rothbard or Louis von Mises. You don't find so that wouldn't that be the case? You might find a book review here or there, but by and large, it's not in their libraries. And that's how they kind of circumvent looking just outright like they're limiting speech, but that's how they sort of kind of curb it.
Yeah.
But let me throw a phrase at you, and you tell me what this means to you in regards to Lincoln. Transformative presidency.
Yeah, to me that means that Lincoln was the first president at a crossroads of the United States. And what I mean by that was he was the last president that kind of disposed of the original vision of the president as a subdued figure that, as Roger Sherman said in the Philadelphia Convention, would simply carry the will of the legislature into effect. Lincoln had the wherewithal to see the United States not only as a decentralized union whereupon most of the political power resided within the individual states, and I wrote about that in my book, but also in a union that took on sacramental characteristics that had never really been ascribed to the Union before. So instead of Thomas Jefferson's view that the Union was essentially utilitarian and only exists to suit the needs of its the members, Lincoln said that, no, this is essentially a perpetual union that's akin to a religious temple.
Yeah. Well, so when I think of transformative presidency, this is one of the interesting things, and this is one of the reasons why I love history, even though it gives us headaches, is that there are certain things that are just demonstrably proven true or false. Like 5 people climbed this mountain. That's just a figure. It's not really up for debate. 2 + 2 is 4. But when you hear the phrase transformative presidency, there are a lot of people in a school of thought that they view that phrase as a compliment, whereas obviously we would view that phrase as a criticism. But we're talking about the exact same person, the exact same phrase, and the exact same kind of underlying meaning of, well, what that means and what's the transition for the country and for the executive. But the exact same words on paper can be interpreted as violently pro or violently con, depending on who you ask. How you as a historian, how do you deal with audiences where you might say to yourself, well, I'm going to talk about X subject, and I'm quoting it straight out of an encyclopedia, and this is what I think. And depending on what row they're in, they can boo or cheer to the exact same words.
I don't know how to answer that, really. I guess every audience has to be tailored to an extent. I've spoken in front of some Tea Party crowds where I've lambasted various presidents and congressmen that have completely undermined and abnegated the Constitution. And I've thrown in, little bite-sized pieces there that, hey, Lincoln raised an army of 75,000 people unilaterally when Congress wasn't in session. And sometimes you get like a bewildered look to it.
Yeah.
But I think it's important. You don't want to try to overrun your audience with everything that they disagree with, but planting those little seeds here and there is the way I've done it.
So what you're telling me is, if I'm hearing you correctly, is that if I get invited to speak somewhere and we're talking about marijuana legalization, I shouldn't immediately jump to, let's talk about recreational heroin. That's what you're trying to tell me.
That's the libertarian strategy. It can't fail.
Well,
I'm not saying, not to take a radical approach. I would consider myself radical, but just to keep your audience in mind,
Well, that word radical is a funny word too, though, because you say you consider yourself a radical. I'm not sure I would necessarily consider you or I to be radical, because it's not like you're, and this is something I've said on the program a lot of times, I've taken a lot of heat for, is that I make the argument most people don't have principles. And that sounds mean, but I mean it. Most people don't have principles. And what I specifically mean about that when it comes to history or politics is I'm always more wary of people that they have to make a decision on every single issue one at a time. Because I feel like, but if you have underlying principles that are helping to guide your decision-making process, you're not actually having to lay out a case for every single individual item on the ballot. You pretty much know. Like, if I know who you are and I know what your principles are, I can kind of guess where you fall on a lot of issues. A lot of people aren't like that, though. A lot of people are, it's totally to the winds. I guess it's that if you don't have principles, you don't really have a platform at all. It's just, let's look at the poll numbers. Whichever one gets 51%, I'm for that. That's destructive.
Yeah, I agree. You lay it out well. The term is relative depending on, the person's conception of radical. I use it in the context of, in comparison to the average, political activist, I would say that, my views are more radical than, say, a moderate Republican or a moderate Democrat. Right?
Sure. So let's get back to Lincoln here for a second. In talking about my old ridiculous professor, the response I gave to that professor who said, this has been done, there's no need to shoehorn this argument in, is I just sent him a picture of the Lincoln Memorial. Can you imagine a founding father in, say, 1787 that was thinking to themselves, I really hope they build a marble visage of me on a throne?
I can't at all. In fact, just the fact that, that would be considered a legitimate gesture to honor a former figure would have thrown, the Republican virtues of that generation to the wind, or at least from the Jeffersonian perspective where, public virtue was the most important thing. It's not about the elevation of a personal figure or the development of a cult of personality and things like that. And that actually kind of makes the issue a Pandora's box to me, and kind of something that I can't fully grasp, because in a way, I think that the cultural Marxists that engage in iconoclasm to tear this stuff down are totally wrong. But then on the flip side, I don't think this would have been acceptable either. So it puts us in an odd place, right?
Something I want you to try to set the stage for us a little bit is, so the first election, so the election that brought Lincoln into office, it's really hard to compare that political atmosphere to today, because we have political parties today other than Democrat and Republican. But let's be honest, that if they get 1%, they've had an amazing year. So
I'm involved in one of them.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a little bit different type of an electoral atmosphere, but also too. So I guess what I'm trying to help set the stage for you that people will complain today that, well, why should we listen to Donald Trump? Over half the country didn't vote for him. Well, over 60% of people didn't vote for Abraham Lincoln. Now, there's reasons why, again, that number is that high. But still, there's a point to be made that what are we looking at in a political climate when more than 6 out of 10 people don't support candidate X, and candidate X wins.
Yeah, it was a unique situation in 1860. There were 4, major office seekers that year. And as you said, it wasn't like it is now. The Democratic Party basically split into sectional fragments, the North being represented by Stephen Douglas of Illinois, the South being represented by John C. Breckinridge of Kentucky. People sometimes say at this point the Republican Party was a third party. It wasn't. The Whigs had completely dissolved by that point, and the Republicans were the second, most popular party. The real third party that year was the Constitutional Union Party, represented by John Bell of our state.
Yeah. So that kind of covers the weird sort of electoral situation. But okay, let's fast forward. Lincoln gets into office. Now, this week was really big in the news, of course, the news about Julian Assange. And I don't want to get too far off topic because we could spend all night talking about just that.
We could.
But it's interesting that we're having our Lincoln episode today because you see all of this dramatic talk on Twitter, more independent media than mainstream media, and it's totally deserved. That they're persecuting a journalist. It's this is I've seen very commonly, this is a shot across the bow of journalism across the and what message does this send that that the United States government can go after a journalist, yada yada yada. Boy, if you want to see where, you want to put that on steroids, let's talk about Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, I think you allude to, one theme that we can talk about when it comes to Lincoln's constitutional transgressions, or even if you don't respect the Constitution as, a baseline, which I'm sure much of your audience does not.
What are you talking about? We all support that magical napkin with unicorn fairy dust on it. What are you talking about?
Regardless, Lincoln engaged in something of the first U.S. campaign to root out opposition for sedition. And not really the first. There was the Sedition Act in 1798. But Lincoln, under the office of Seward, his Secretary of State, set up something of a prototype for a secret police that actually shut down 300 northern newspapers. These are not newspapers that the Army came into the South and disrupted.
Sure.
These are northern newspapers that are condemning Lincoln and criticizing his policies.
So, speaking along that same line, I know that we were talking about a little bit before the show, different lines that the Lincoln apologist will take. And I had particularly brought up Missouri in General Order Number 11. And the reason I brought that up is because that's kind of civil asset forfeiture on steroids. Before that was really a thing, that was happening. And the Lincoln apologist would argue, oh, but he didn't know about it. Those were bad actors underneath him, and it didn't go all the way up to the top. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you buy that?
2. The president's the commander-in-chief of the Army, and sometimes presidents have delegated a larger relative amount of power to their subordinates, but ultimately it comes down to them. And if it comes down to civil asset forfeiture and things like that, the president has the power to grant pardons and reprieves. So you can't tell me that both he didn't know about it and that's not a factor as well. You raised the point about Missouri. There's lots of interesting facets about Missouri. In fact, John C. Fremont, the general, went there and enacted an emancipation of slaves. But Lincoln actually dismissed him from his post because the emancipation applied to northern slaveholders, so that were loyal to the Union.
Sure.
Also engaging in civil asset forfeiture and the suspension of habeas corpus, which is basically disallowing the government from holding you indefinitely in Maryland. So lots of places were subject to some of the same things. And really, the Lincoln administration, many of these violations contain the germ of all the maladies that we see today in the federal government.
Well, it's funny that you bring that up. The next thing I have on my notes, we were talking earlier about a word and how different camps can totally different interpretations of it. Brian McClanahan used the word that Lincoln really set the stage for the modern presidency. Now, again, the Lincolnite would say, "Oh, wonderful, well done." We wouldn't quite have that. Yeah, golf clap for the modern presidency. But of course, I believe the point that McClanahan's making, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but I think you'll make this point as well, is that this is exactly why he's on our crap list. Is that is exactly so? Is that he's taking what the presidency entails And not only does he go in a completely different direction, but as government often does, all of those who come after him then are just ratcheting up that intensity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything that we ascribe to the office today finds some of its starting junctures in the Lincoln administration. Whenever we see the president engage in wars that are undeclared without the advice or without the approval of Congress, they're kind of seeing a new projection of Lincoln in our age. Whenever they see that Lincoln, proposed to follow in the lines of Henry Clay, who he called a beau ideal of a statesman, enacting the, protective tariffs and enacting the greenbacks, starting a draft for the first time. Those are all modern issues that we have to wrestle with now today because of Lincoln.
Let me say this, because we want to have some time left over to talk about Game of Thrones. Season 8 starts this Sunday. We got to talk about Game of Thrones. Woo! I know somebody else here in the audience is going to be really happy to know we're going to talk about Game of Thrones. But before we get to that, I'm going to give you a chance to kind of take the conclusion here of something that we haven't already covered, or if someone gives you 5 minutes to say, well, give us something that's really damning about Lincoln himself or the Lincoln administration that you feel like needs more time on air.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to bring up on your podcast is to talk about slavery and its relation to the war. Now, the war has been discussed to death by historians of all types and the starting points of war. But I think there's two different reasons for why the war started and why states seceded. The latter is actually harder to come to grips with because I think the Middle South states seceded for entirely different reasons than the Southern states. For instance, our home state of Tennessee actually passed a referendum in early 1861 where the citizens decided not to secede from the Union because of slavery, because the Deep South states like Alabama and Mississippi were saying, hey, join the Confederacy. Lincoln's just going to abolish slavery in all the states once he takes office. Well, Tennessee didn't agree with that. Same with Virginia, who actually held its first secession convention early in that year and decided not to secede because of slavery. Now, after Lincoln decided to resupply Fort Sumter and then decided to blockade the southern ports and again raise an army of 75,000 people with the express purpose of invading the South, that's when the Middle South states seceded. Now, when it comes to why the war started, just the fact that secession occurred doesn't necessitate a war, especially under the U.S. constitutional system where, I point out in my book, the founding generation categorically and overtly said that states can secede, and in Virginia, George Nicholas said that. But that's a different reason entirely. The true reason why this war happened was because Lincoln decided to resupply Fort Sumter. He could not accept secession. It wasn't slavery. In fact, Lincoln supported the Corwin Amendment, which many of your guests might be familiar with, which was a proposed version of the 13th Amendment, which would have legitimized slavery for all time. They said as part of this amendment that this is an unamendable amendment, which to me, by the way, is constitutionally dubious.
Yeah,
but that's what they're saying. So that's my concise thing about what the public needs to know about Lincoln, because it seems that all the public gets is Lincoln was the great emancipator.
Well, I'm going to be rude and ask you one more thing when I said that was the conclusion. You triggered a neckbeard on Facebook today who made the argument that war was a foregone conclusion, but you don't agree with that. Even up to Sumter, war was not a foregone conclusion.
I don't. Here's a few of the pieces of evidence. So, as I said earlier, the head of the army didn't think it was necessary. He begged Lincoln not to resupply the fort. Lincoln's cabinet didn't want him to do so until it came into April when some of them switched their positions and said, hey, let's resupply the fort. The President of the United States from 1860 to 1861, James Buchanan, said, I think slavery is unconstitutional, but I'm not going to do anything to stop it. And the world didn't collapse. Yeah. Like the Union did not spontaneously combust, right? Yeah. Northern newspapers, some of which began what's called the Copperhead movement. They're basically northern opponents of Lincoln and opponents of the war, which eventually became known as Lincoln's War, kind of fueled this fire at the beginning too to oppose the war. So no, a peaceful severance was possible. It was if it was perfectly able to sell the forts and other federal properties to the federal government. It was viable.
There you have it.
I'll also say just one more thing there,
Yeah.
just real quick. Great book out there by Jim Powell called Greatest Emancipations. It's a incredible immersive study of all the different Western nations and how they abolished slavery in their respective territories.
Yes.
And really, the United States is really the only one that basically kind of abolished slavery by force through the subjugation of a portion of the Union. That book brings up cases like Brazil and England, where all of this was done peacefully without bloodshed.
Yeah, exactly. I've heard the case made in the past that the English model was good. It was costly. It was economically painful for at least a time, but it was not a blood price. And believe it or not, I've actually heard people make the argument that that would have been such an economic shock to the system that couldn't work. That wasn't a viable option in the United States. And I'm blown away by people that make statements like that. One is that you have such little regard for the loss of life. That's a better alternative. Oh, let's just go ahead and kill everybody. That's better. But also too so you don't think that then the war itself and Reconstruction afterwards, that wasn't an economic shock to the system.
I was just going to say that war is usually a costly venture.
Well, keep in mind, of course, these are the same people that think that, World War II got us out of the Depression. Those are the kinds of people that would say, we had to fight a war. We couldn't buy the slaves. We had to fight a war, Dave, I think you've covered that pretty well. But I want to have a chance to show everybody your website, davebenner.com. What all can they find on Dave Benner? Other than, of course, Compact of the Republic, the League of States and the Constitution by Dave Benner.
Other than Compact of the Republic, the League of States and the Constitution, they can find all of my content ranging from articles that I post that I submit to Abbeville Institute, Mises Institute, 10th Amendment Center, and Intellectual Takeout. I also have a podcast called Brush Fires of the Mind. You can check that out from the bar at the top. That is currently in a season where I'm discussing the struggle for American independence. So I'm starting with 1765 and the Stamp Act, actually a little bit before that, and going all the way up to the Treaty of Paris. I'm currently in episode approximately 22, I think, and we're just to Saratoga, so that's been a fun venture. I also have a YouTube site where I put out videos called History in a Nutshell. And what I do here is rather than, drone on and lecture, which, trust me, I love to do, but I try to boil down big issues in American history, especially founding era history, into 5 to 10 minute segments and just give everyone what they need in that small period, and that's on my site as well. So please take a look at the site, grab my book. If you're interested in political decentralization, the origins of the American Union, and why the decentralized union was chosen, take a look at that.
That is Dave Benner, DaveBenner.com, where you can find all that awesome stuff.
Thank you.
Dave, it has been great to have you on the show.
Yeah,
we're going to have
Alan.
to move on to our next guest, who is a Game of Thrones expert. Dave Benner, welcome to the show.
Hey, how's it going?
So we're going to spend the last little bit here before we sign off talking about Game of Thrones. So I've wanted to do this for a while, and I really wanted to do it before Season 8 got here. Of course, that was more realistic like a year ago, because God only knows when the show was going to come back on. Now it's this weekend. So if we don't do it now, it's not going to happen. So you've read the books.
I've read all the books twice. I know that you're an avid book aficionado as well, even to a greater extent, it sounds like. But I love the show and the books.
All right, we gotta get serious now. We gotta get ready into this. So for people who are watching this at home, by the way, you might hear some spoilers from Game of Thrones in the next little bit here. So if you don't want, right? So if you don't want to hear any spoilers from the show or the books, actually, no, I better not tell people now's the time to turn it off. Nobody's watching, it's fine. Nobody's watching the show anymore, it's fine. So I'm going to start right off the bat. On a scale of 1 to 10, how excited are you for the Season 8 premiere?
I'm probably about a 9. I think that there's been seasons where I'm a little bit more excited, but I'm really excited to see how they set the stage for this season, and especially when it comes to the characters coming together, because we're at a point in the show where they're not having like all these different scenes in different parts of Westeros. You're having like the major cast members in the same place, and that's exciting.
There's only 6 episodes this season. So I will say this. I agree with you that the excitement level is high just because it's the end. I mean, it's gonna be a conclusion, whether it's good or bad. It's gonna be a conclusion. So I'm excited to see it. With that said, didn't love the last couple of years. Didn't love the last couple of seasons. I don't think it's a shock that the seasons that were further removed from the books also happen to be the seasons that are, even if you enjoyed them from a narrative standpoint, a little bit disjointed. Don't really have quite the same feel as the original author. One thing that I wanted to bring up from just purely a narrative standpoint, George R. R. Martin is a pretty big anti-war advocate, which more power to him. That's fantastic. And one of the things he does in his books, in a lot of his books, and in Song of Ice and Fire especially, is a lot of times the big awesome battles, they're not really portrayed in the book. Like you get accounts of them around. And he said specifically in interviews, it's because he doesn't want to glorify battle, because that's not what he's about. Well, obviously, the TV show's a TV show, and you're trying to get ratings. And so, by God, we're going to have a battle.
Battle of the Bastards 8. Let's do it, man.
It's going to be awesome. But so I guess I guess the gripe is more that I totally understand why, but it definitely loses some of the feel that the books have, because that's a pretty significant difference in tone. The show is absolutely oorah, look at Jon Snow go, whereas the books are very much, well, no, we don't want to. You'll learn more of the aftermath, which is the more gruesome part of it, which is what he's trying to portray. So that this is bad. People are dying, and regular folks are bearing the brunt. And I think the show missed that a lot.
Yeah, I am in total agreement when it comes to the last few seasons. I think are the weaker seasons, and you kind of implied this as well, but the show started off, for those that don't know, the first 3 seasons are pretty good representations of the first 3 books. There's some places where 2 characters were combined into one and things like that. Sure. But after that, it kind of went off into its own territory. The show's done things like basically not had the Aegon Targaryen and Dorne storyline, which a lot of people kind of liked in the books, I think. But I think that was actually a wise decision. That would have just been too tangential for where the show's going. So some things I can understand, but I'm totally with you. The biggest criticisms that I hear, and I kind of share this in some ways, is, characters time warp from place to place too quickly. The most infamous example is Varys. He solidifies an alliance with Dorne, then goes back to Essos to invade with Daenerys, things like that.
So I think, too, is what's interesting about combining characters and combining plot points and cutting certain characters, what will always anger people is that some things that did not get cut but were severely altered were altered for the worse. I think the Sand Snakes. Most people hate the Sand Snakes.
Yeah, man.
I mean, I feel pretty confident. That's not just I think the overwhelming majority of viewers hated the whole Dornish plotline, hated Jaime and Bronn going there, hated all the Sand Snakes in every scene they were in, except for one in a jail cell for obvious reasons. But though they didn't get cut, they're in the books, and they made it into the show. But in the books, they're way deeper, more complex plot lines going on around Dorne that, of course, is yet to be played out because we're waiting for the last couple of books. And so it's like, in some sense, it's like, well, I wish you'd just cut it. You should have just cut all that out of the show if you were going to half-ass it, I guess, is what I would say.
Yeah, they tried to kind of completely throw to the side that storyline, but there are other places like that. Some things that fans often complain about that they missed, I think one of them, and again, spoiler alert here, is Lady Stoneheart. I think a lot of people wanted to see that, but instead it seems like they added, more sand snake stuff, or it's lunacy. That could have been kind of a cool redemptive arc for certain characters, but I don't know.
Well, in like, for instance, so, obviously John Connington. John Conn's not in the show, but they more or less combined him with Jorah and the whole grayscale thing and all that. That actually didn't bother me so much because the actor, Ian Glenn, who's playing Jorah, is excellent. He's portraying...
Jorah the friend zone.
Jorah the friend zone. He's playing... The actor's playing the role excellently. I like the character. He's not as important of a character in the books as he is in the show, and maybe that's a byproduct of having more plot lines coalesced around him and around that actor in real life. But I guess the point is I'm okay with that because it was done well. I mean, that's really what's important, right? Is it was done well so I can excuse differences, whereas the differences that stick out are the ones that just flat out weren't done well.
Yeah, I think the other storyline that was not done very well was the Winterfell storyline from last season.
Yes.
Where it's basically Littlefinger, Arya, and Sansa, and the whole season is essentially consumed with dramatics that Littlefinger's trying to divide Sansa and Arya. I thought it wasn't very creative, and they could have done more with that, especially because Littlefinger, evil, menacing guy, but great character. I feel like it was just so disappointing the way that season went for him.
It was really disappointing, and the way they wrote him out of the show was disappointing because you have spent years, and for George R.R. Martin, literally thousands of pages, constructing this very diabolical character that's a genius, that's amazing at what he does, at manipulation and deceit. And then in season 7, he just kind of wet the bed. And you're like, but that's not Littlefinger. Like, I could see Jorah putting a plot together and getting found out because he's an idiot. He's a fighter. He's not a thinker. Right. Littlefinger's a thinker, and he got outthought by, a couple of girls and the rest of the Winterfell staff. And that's silly. I mean, that's
He had no due process either. He couldn't even call witnesses to
very
attest
true.
on his behalf. It's Fifth Amendment in Winterfell, guys.
Very, very true. Well, it's a weakness in the narrative that when, like, you can make the argument that, well, they do things differently in North. Well, maybe, but by the North's own customs, that was a fraud. Like, if they had drug anyone else in there, if they had drug one of the Knights of the Vale in there and slit his throat, the rest of the Vale would have been like, whoa, you can't. Wait a minute. Like, even if he was guilty, you can't just do that without there being some type of say. So it was definitely weak.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
Just the last thing, this will be quick, is the other thing I'll be disappointed with is if this is how this character is written out, is if Dario Naharis plays no role in the rest of the series. Because...
All right, wait, hold on. The first Dario Naharis or the second Dario Naharis?
I mean, the first was more representative of the book character.
Yes, he was.
But the second, it just seems like that whole part was thrown to the wayside. Like, Marine does not exist anymore. The slavers are gone, and Dario's supposed to watch it. But, you know, I think the show would do a disservice if they don't bring him back and have him betray Daenerys. But that's just
Just want to say a couple of quick things before we go through our list. Sue Benner says hello.
That's my mom, and my dad use the same account.
So mom and dad say hello.
Howdy.
And Whitney Anderson Benner says, watching this and Game of Thrones marathon at the same time. That sounds challenging.
Whitney is my...
That sounds hard to do. Well, in that case, we're probably ruining it. I hope it's a rewatch marathon, not a first. Otherwise, we've destroyed this. I'm really sorry. Okay, let's go through some quick ones. We're going to do a list of favorite, least favorite. And we'll say, just for the sake of our audience, we're going to say predominantly show, because that's, hey, season 8's coming up. There ain't no. We'll talk about Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring later. I'm gonna spoil that really quick by saying I'm not totally convinced I'll ever read those books. But anyway, favorite, least favorite houses.
My favorite is the Lannisters.
No.
Yeah.
And I wore this ugly tie and.
My favorite is the Lannisters because it's the most political house. There seems to be the most, maybe, schisms within that house compared to the rest, and I like the characters, I think, the most out of that house, so that's what I'll go with. I actually have a cheesy Lannister shirt and a keychain. I think I have the Lannister lion right here. Do I? Yes, right here. I don't know if the camera can get that, but Lannister. Least favorite house...
Wait, hold on. Does he have a Lannister shirt? Okay.
She thinks that's a heavy metal band. So.
Okay, well, all right, so continue.
Yeah, least favorite house, probably the Tyrells. It just seems like they're a little bit boring. They have the grain produce, and Highgarden is basically there for 10 minutes of an episode. Didn't like Marjorie, didn't like Loras. Did like Olenna Tyrell, great character and great actress, but I didn't really like that house.
So I would say we're basing this predominantly on the show.
Yes.
The Tyrells are one that the books are way better for the Tyrells.
Yeah, I think so.
And the show destroyed them. The Tyrells and the Martells, which ironically in book lore are warring houses. They bordered each other, and in ages past they fought each other. Both of those had a handful of really awesome characters in the show, but as a whole unit were kind of flat. But in the books, they're wildly different, much more well fleshed out. You get more of the intrigue, and so I would say I'm going to do mine really quick. just so that I'm not uber cheese and say Starks or anything like that, let's say my least favorite is probably the Lannisters because they're a bunch of freaking politicians. I mean, so basically your answer, what we were talking about in the first half, so your answer, and that's why I hate them. I agree with everything you said, and that's why I hate them. I would say my favorite, believe it or not, and of course this is because I'm a book homer, but show as well, is the Martells. Because Oberyn Martell is my favorite character. And we're going to do characters next, and I'm spoiling. Oberyn Martell is so awesome. Oberyn Martell, and I will say this too, because our next segment after that is actors as well. One way that the show kind of redeems itself against the books is, well, what is a show? A show is acting. It's actors. Sometimes a show is cast so well, and an actor does such an amazing portrayal of a character that you're like, I can no longer read or think of that character as other than that actor ever again. And Pedro Pascal played Oberyn Martell. Excellent. Just absolutely. And so, I mean, just for that one character alone, I love the Martells. Even though the Sand Snakes and the show and the rest of it, just Oberyn alone. And Oberyn and Dorne combined in the books are way better than in the show. So I'm going to say favorite Martells. But let's do individual characters. And you don't have to just name one. You can name 2 or 3, but favorite characters.
Yeah, so I'll cheat. Well, no. This one I do. I have a defined favorite.
Okay.
I'll give one honorable mention. Jaime Lannister is my favorite character in Game of Thrones. And the reason is because his complexities are such that there's no real character like him. Much of the audience of the show, learned to just despise this guy in season 1. Mm-hmm. And he really did some pretty hideous things. I mean,
yes.
When you have incest and trying to kill a kid in the first pilot episode,
yes,
people are not going to like him. But once he explains his point of view and, what decisions he was faced with, I think he won more people over. And he's back on a redemptive arc now. Yeah. But really the reason I love Jaime so much is because he really serves as a microcosm for everything Martin kind of does with the show. And that's portrays characters as not 100% bad or 100% good, because that's not really reality for most people. I think we would say Stalin was that way maybe, but not for most people. And that's what Martin does best. Jaime represents it.
So what about least favorite? Well, hold on. That was honorable mention. Give me an
honorable mention is Tyrion. He's just a great actor. The character gets the best lines. I mean, he's a dream for a writer, probably, and he has complexities, too, and just to see where he started and where he's come is interesting, too.
Yeah, okay, least favorite.
Least favorite character, and I'm just going to paint this with an explanation of, I think that I really dislike how the show has portrayed her in comparison to the book, is Daenerys. I feel like the acting's stale. I feel like she's actually more of a tyrannical figure in the show compared to the book. Where actually she's pretty darn ruthless and has more of the Mad King than I think the book tries to, imply.
All right, we're going to have to stop on that one for just a second and spell that out. So I would make the argument that, I see what you're saying about Daenerys not being a great character in the show. I would make the argument that show and book, maybe book more because we genuinely don't know how the books are going to play out. I think the book has purposely left the door, like setting the stage of Targaryens and having madness. The reason that stage was set so that the reader would wonder where Daenerys is going to end up. Sure, she started off as this vulnerable young lady, but I mean, when you burn some innocent people alive as a message to the rest of them,
exactly.
I'm sorry, so I guess, what you said, it reminded me of the Stannis Baratheon line where he was talking about, one act of good doesn't wash away the bad, just like one act of bad doesn't wash away the good. But there's certain acts that I'm always amazed by, like just regular people on the street who say, yeah, I love her, or oh yeah, or Jaime's awesome. Like, well, he trying to murder a child, right? Like, and it's like they know, but they're willing to forget. Not forget. They're willing to forget it because the character moved on. Well, the character might have moved on, kid's still crippled. And so that charred corpse is still in the dragon's belly, whether Daenerys has grown as a person or not. So the point being is that the story is compelling, but if this was a judge and jury type situation, you having a compelling life a few years after you murder someone doesn't change the fact you murdered someone.
It's true.
Just something to think about. Yeah,
it is.
So I'm going to say really quick favorite Oberyn Martell. just awesome.
Great character.
Just awesome.
Too short-lived, but great.
In such a short period of time was such an awesome character, and the actor Pedro Pascal played him so well. Davos Seaworth. Davos is, and he doesn't play anywhere near that level of character in the books, at least thus far. In the show, he became our grandfatherly advisor figure, more pronounced. But he's an excellent character, and the actor Liam Cunningham, I think,
That's right,
plays him excellently. I would probably say for least favorite, the cheesy answer would be sand snakes, things like that. I would say I really don't love Varys. I really don't love Varys, and maybe it's a show book thing that, of course, again, in the books, you're not really so sure where Varys stands on anything. And that's what makes the character so mysterious and compelling, is that we're not really totally sure who Varys does and doesn't support. And this whole I do it for the realm business, that sounds an awful lot like for the greater
General good. That's
yeah,
your
yeah,
right there.
yeah. So it's
the
like
general will.
That sours me on that character, that he's so big on the whole for the realm nonsense. I will say honorable mention is Jon and Daenerys. They're the main characters. Who doesn't love the Battle of the Bastards? Who doesn't love the action? And Kit Harington. He looks the part, obviously, and all that. And he's going to be our big super duper hero and all that. But in the world of Game of Thrones, that makes him quite boring. There's so many characters that are so much more complex, that go through so much more growth. Jon goes through a lot of hardships, but I don't know if that's growth. That's a difference. Jaime goes through growth. Jon just gets magically elected a leader of a gang, that he totally was not qualified to become, but does because he has an interesting name, and he's the... And it's kind of one of my gripes of show and book in general, is that I understand they're different. I understand you have to respect them differently, and we already talked about tone, but it's more of that. What makes Game of Thrones compelling is you don't know who's going to live or die. You don't know where loyalties lie. You don't know where the next twist is going to come. But for characters like Jon Snow, you totally know what's going to happen next, because he's just your common everyday Superman. And in Game of Thrones, that's boring. Yeah. So, actors.
Oh, actors. So I have to say two here as well.
Okay.
Nikolai Coster-Waldau.
Yes.
Plays a great Jaime. He has moments of complete anger and just brutal ferocity, but also moments of, introspection and kind of, emotional openness and things like that. I just think he plays every part well. The second one, I just think this guy knocked his character out of the park, is Charles Dance as Tywin Lannister. He just owns that character. Everything that he did really represented what I think that Martin meant for that character. So
it's so interesting that you bring up Charles Dance and Tywin, because, of course, this is earlier seasons where it's much more lined up with the books. And sure enough, and there's a great casting, so props to the show, but the show's lined up mostly with the books. A character is portrayed pretty accurately to the books, and it comes off very well. Surprise, surprise, George R.R. Martin actually knows what he's doing when he wrote Song of Ice and Fire, whereas the same can't quite always be said for characters who maybe they were already introduced, but their character arcs came later. If their character arcs came in seasons 1, 2, and 3, they're like on. And Tywin all the way. I agree with that. What about actors that you don't think have done well?
Okay, so this one, I'll choose one of the main characters, or one of the more screen time characters, because it'll be more relevant to this question. I think I'm going to say Sansa Stark, and I don't think it's necessarily because of her as an actor. I think that a lot of it is due to the writing for her. I just feel like the writers did not do her a very big service. She comes off as whiny a lot, where really Sansa, part of her character arc was learning from Littlefinger how to play the Game of Thrones, how to make alliances, how to, get your way. But really, she's just, whining throughout season 9 about what to do, where I think that the show should have had her try to implement some things in Winterfell regardless of what Jon Snow said, because it would have made the character better. So I'm not fully blaming her, but I'll say Sansa.
I get that. Sansa and Brienne are my least favorite characters from the books, and so that spills over into the show, even if the show actor is... Like, I think the lady, Gwendolyn Christie, is Brienne.
Yes.
Man, I'm on fire tonight. I actually didn't look up a lot of this stuff, so I'm feeling pretty good. I think she's been a perfectly good portrayal of Brienne. I just hate the character Brienne. So, I mean, it's like, there's not, for me, there's not much that can be done on the matter. Sansa's the same way. When I look at Sansa, I hate book Sansa. I hate books. Book Sansa destroyed her house. She destroyed House Stark. It's Sansa that did it. So So I have such a preconceived bias against Sansa that, and yeah, in the show you're right that of course, but credit to her, that's also a plot line that diverged significantly from the books. On top of the show has surpassed the books there a bit. So, I mean, how much can we blame? It's not like George R. R. Martin did that to her. You know, that's just how it played out.
Yeah, who would you say though?
Actors that I already mentioned Pedro Pascal as Oberyn, Liam Cunningham.
That you don't like.
That I don't like. Daenerys, Emilia Clarke. What's funny about her is that I don't know, and we don't know if this is an actress thing or a director thing, but the actual Emilia Clarke is a very expressive, very lively human being. And Daenerys is just flat as stone.
I kind of agree.
And that actually tends to make me think that was direction, though. So I don't know. Yeah. That tends to make me think that maybe the directors were saying, "Well, you're this broken down person," or in the next season, "Oh, you're just the God Queen," and the show she's doing this number. I'm like, it just doesn't really come off as very genuine.
Gendry's another character. I think that the actor's not very good. I'll say too.
Yeah, Game of Thrones. It's actually, I will say this I'll give the show credit. It's harder to pick actors I don't like because as a show, I think the casting has been excellent. As a show, I think it's been excellent. It's like I could name 5 actors I think have done great, and maybe just the 1 or 2 actors I think have not done great.
Agreed.
Daenerys is one bad one. And I would say, it's so weird to say for the casual normie out there, but probably Kit Harington might be next. And for the similar reasons. Similar reasons.
Them's fighting words.
I know.
To the Twitter sphere.
I know.
Get
but
your tweets in.
But here's the thing, though, is that for all of those awards that they'll nominate Emilia Clarke or Kit Harington for, should have been Alfie Allen, who's Theon. Should have been Liam Cunningham. The lady who played Olenna.
Diana Riggs. Excellent actress.
Charles Dance. Those are the people that should have been nominated. But of course, it's Hollywood. They're trying to promote their program above any award for an individual. They're trying to promote the show. So they're going to promote their biggest stars and the biggest roles for the biggest awards. I'm sorry, a lot of these other ancillary characters were the best.
Yeah.
I mean, in such a way that it's kind of like one of those things that if you go see a live play where, for tonight's showing of Alan's Dinky Play in Columbia, Joe Bob the janitor will be played by Tom Hanks. Well, when Tom Hanks blows the rest of us out of the water, in some ways it actually kind of hurts the show. Because you're like, but that's not the focal point of the show, and it's being wasted. And a lot of the people who are not really the focal point of the narrative of Game of Thrones were actually the best portrayed characters.
I 100% agree.
Well, that's why you're on the show. It's because you're... All right. We're gonna do a couple quick more, and we're going to wrap this up. Scenes. Favorite scene?
So... I don't know if I can choose a favorite scene, but my favorite episode is for sure Blackwater. I feel that was the best episode of the show because it had everything. It had dramatics, character development, some interesting battle, but really that takes an ancillary position in the show. But it was just it culminated in basically something that you didn't expect, that Tywin would take King's Landing with his army. I don't think I expected that. So that was the best episode. One scene I did like is, I think it's a defining moment, is Brienne and Jaime in the hot tub. Just Jaime spilling his emotional experiences in a way that he hadn't done to any other character. He was the Kingslayer. He kind of had that chip on his shoulder for everyone else except Brienne. So I really like that scene.
Totally random side note. When he gets into the hot tub, wouldn't that have really hurt his stump?
I think he held it out like this the whole time. Could be wrong.
I don't know. Okay. So, least favorite scene. Or episode.
least favorite scene or
Cringy
episode.
moment, maybe.
Can you go first while I think about
Okay,
this?
I'll tell you my two favorites because I actually have one printed off. The first one is when Oberyn tells Tyrion he'll be his champion when he goes down into the dungeon, and Oberyn is telling Tyrion the story of we've met before, you and I, and he talks about meeting Tyrion when he was a baby, and that Jaime and Cersei took Oberyn and his sister to meet this freak that had been born to Tywin Lannister, and it just shows the difference in quality of humanity of an Oberyn Martell versus a Cersei Lannister. Because, of course, Cersei only sees Tyrion as this monster and describes him as such. And Oberyn looks down at him and says, that's just a baby. And it says a lot about the character of Oberyn Martell, on top of the fact that really the point of the scene was, I'll go fight for you. Believe it or not, I actually read this. You know that was the first scene that he filmed?
No.
Does that not blow your mind? Like they were telling him, okay, you're in the character of Oberyn now, film this scene.
That does.
And I'm like, whoa, he killed it. If I were them, I'd have been pretty excited. Hey, I think we got the right guy. My second favorite is the one I have printed out, is Yoren, who was the Night's Watch veteran who was recruiting in King's Landing when Ned was beheaded. He found Arya and cut her hair and whisked her out because he was trying to save her life, and would have. I guess technically did. And she asks him about, well, how'd you wind up in the Night's Watch? Because most people in the Night's Watch are criminals. And he says this story. He says, we've got something common, me and you. You know that? I must have been a couple of years older than you. I saw my brother stabbed through the heart right on our doorstep. He weren't much of a villain, what skewered him. Willem, the lad's name was. He ran off before anyone could spit, and I just stood there watching my brother die. But here's the funny part. I can't picture my brother's face anymore. But Willem. He was a nice-looking boy, had good white teeth, blue eyes, one of those dimpled chins all the girls like. And I would think about him when I was working and when I was drinking and when I was having a shit. It got to the point where I would say his name every night before I went to bed, which is where Arya gets that from, Willem, 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 a prayer almost. Well, one day Willem came riding back into town, and I buried an axe so deep into his skull they had to bury him with it. That always... Maybe because I'm just one of these crazy Southern guys that has that angst about them, as some Southerners do, is that really speaks to me. And I'm a libertarian, and I believe in the non-aggression principle. But I've also been the type of person that thought, well, if someone rode into town that was among the political elite, and they stabbed my brother through the heart, it would be hard for me to not think every day and night, if he ever comes back into town, I'm going to get him. And that way made me love the character Yoren. It's very, but that's of course that's old school Game of Thrones. That's earlier season Game of Thrones.
Very peripheral character,
yes.
But important scene.
Yeah, exactly. So, and we made the point before we went on the show is that by all accounts, pretty minor character, but you feel reverberations of that character for years. That's what made the show and books amazing.
I have a terrible scene I can think of.
Tell me a terrible
scene. This is
scene.
in the last season. Everything about this scene, I tried to get my mind into it, like, hey, this is where the show's going, I should enjoy it, but it is the party to capture the White. I just could not understand the reasoning behind this. So there's so many different dimensions of it, so I'll just try to lay it out. So first of it, the payoff for this seems to be the worst imaginable. You're taking basically 5 of the best warriors that you have in the upcoming War for the Dawn, going up north, trying to capture a White, to show it to Cersei, who is a tyrant and you think has the potential to betray you in the first place. And then, if that wasn't enough, here's the kicker. Daenerys sends the dragons up there to bail him out. So you're not only involving those 5 characters, but also the dragons against the Night King, where this is hindsight's 2020, but one has been taken by the Night King now, Viserion? I can't remember which one. But this risks everything, including Thoros of Myr, who died. I think I kind of want a guy that can resurrect anyone that he wants.
Yeah, exactly.
It didn't make sense. I couldn't wrap my mind around it, and they just wanted to go for dramatics rather than character development in the last season. I just really think that.
Whitney Anderson Benner says Tormund. So, shame on you for not.
Tormund is a good character.
Yeah, I'm assuming she probably thinks good character. Yeah.
Very good, good character. He loves Brienne. That'll be interesting if there's a Brienne character arc.
That's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
I will say really quickly for bad scene, God, there's so many from the last couple of seasons. I mean,
Yeah.
there really are. Yeah, the whole show, even according to some people, the whole show. I really hated the fight between the Hound and Brienne, which for one doesn't happen in the books at all. That's completely manufactured, and I don't mean they took something else and added it in. No, that's completely manufactured. And of course, obviously, like raw feminism, she beats up the Hound, yada yada yada, and all that. It's a very visceral, manhandling kind of a fight, and I understand that she's a big lady and tough, but I don't know. Hound's a pretty big dude.
Yeah.
Probably pretty strong. He punches her in her face like 3 or 4 times in a row with a mailed fist.
But she's from Tarth.
With a mailed fist. If a teenager put on brass knuckles and punched you, you'd lose most of your teeth. The Hound is like 7 feet tall and with a mailed fist punched this woman in the face like 4 or 5 times. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. I'm sorry. It's not even about like a feminist thing or anything. I don't even care that Brienne won. It's that fight is ridiculous.
Random question I have to ask you before
Okay.
we wrap. Can you do any impressions of any of the characters' voices?
I could have done a good Yoren, but I decided not to do it. I can do a pretty good Ben Shapiro, but he's not on Game of Thrones. So,
Do it.
no. I'm not practiced up on the voices. I feel like you're leading this up to. You've got a good one.
I'm terrible at this, but I'm going to give it a go. This
Okay.
is Jorah Mormont. Ready?
Okay.
The dragons, Khaleesi, they can never be tamed. That's my best go.
I wouldn't know.
Crickets, frogs.
Okay. Well, good. Good for you.
Your audience actually has never seen an episode of Game of Thrones sitting in here,
Yeah.
so
That's all I got.
I don't know.
it's very entertaining, though.
I tell you
I'll
what.
keep writing history, so just so everyone.
I feel like if I practiced hard enough, I could do a Littlefinger, because he has a very particular, inflection. Yeah, well, a particular creepy pedophilic inflection. Yeah. All right, really quick, a particular quote that you really like.
By what right does the wolf judge the lion?
You would, Lannister.
Well, so again, this is a major theme that runs through the whole series, the whole books, is that, these houses, they sometimes have individual characters where another character somehow aligns with in a particular task and things like that. But really, a lot of the houses look at each other as collectivized representatives of that house. And that's part of the show. So.
Yeah. If I'm going to name one more other than the Oberyn Martell and the Yoren, I would say when Davos confronted Melisandre with the half-burnt little stag that he carved, just the emotion in the actor's voice when he's just saying matter-of-factly, she was good and kind and you killed her!
Oh, dude.
And it was like... and of course them, because like I said, the show is excellent. It's just I have gripes about the show, but it's been done well, and cinematography's excellent. The casting's excellent, and in that scene where it's just silent, there's no music, there's no nothing. It's just you can feel the weight on her when he says it, and I'm like, dang, that is really good. All right, really quick before we go, season 8 predictions. First of all, will there be an Iron Throne, as in will there be a singular king or queen, and who will it be?
So I have a feeling that there will not be an Iron Throne.
Okay.
That will be kind of completely cast by the wayside. Daenerys's kind of vision from the House of Undying, and I think season 2 a little bit foreshadows this. As far as predictions, I'll go through some really quick. Yara's killed, and then Theon kills Euron. Jaime is the Valonqar and will kill Cersei Lannister by wrapping his hands around her. I don't know how it will be, if it will be part of his brass arm or not. I think Jon Snow represents Azor Ahai, or the prince that was promised, and I think Daenerys dies. I also think either Tyrion or Varys betrays Daenerys, but not both. It's going to be one of the two. I can't really pinpoint it, but I think it'll be one of those two. So those are major ones. What about you?
I feel like some of that has more likelihood in the books than in the show because the show has no time left. It's like it's kind of like whatever we were planning for the next 5 or 6 hours of film time, scratch it because we got to wrap up the show in 6 episodes. And so I feel like in a lot of ways that kind of deads it for us. Like we know they're not going to introduce 17 more characters and have a plot line because it's just not possible. With that said, I think they've kind of set the stage that Daenerys can't have kids anymore, but now she will because Jon Snow is going to knock her up. I think she will die, but this isn't one of those time things where goodness knows Littlefinger like traversed the continent 17 times in 2 days. I think the show's going to end pretty soon, but if she's going to have a baby, then something has to come of that. Like we have to figure out the chronology of that. I think Jon Snow's going to die. I think Jon Snow may end up being the next Night King. I feel very confident that something like that happens in the books. Again, I don't know where the show's going to go because they're out of time. I think that the Iron Throne will be gone. There won't be a singular ruler. I think they're going to be like our democracy, or it'll be some bullshit like that. # democracy is cancer. And I think Tyrion will survive.
Agreed.
And I think
So say we all.
I think Arya will survive, and I base that largely on the fact that George R. R. Martin, the author, has said in interviews it would presume that he hasn't already planned to kill her off because he's made the statement, I don't think I can kill her off because that's my wife's favorite character and she'd be mad. So even though that's a silly comment, that would seem to suggest he hasn't already planned it. And if he hasn't already planned it, but he's mostly diagrammed the story, then I think that means Arya's probably going to make it.
Oh, and Bran will warg a dragon. That's my other prediction.
Bran will warg a dragon?
Yeah.
I mean, well, Bran has to do something, right? Like, why? We've been through all of this.
He'll tell Jon Snow with Sam what his lineage is, and then, he has to do something else. Otherwise,
years of content could not have just been for him to learn Jon Snow's parents. Because if that was the only payoff, they could have just found a note. That could have been it. So there has to be a payoff. But again, I'm more intrigued about how the payoffs will come because we just don't have much film time left in order to get them. I have a feeling that it'll be fun to watch, but I'm not going to like it. I'm ready for the book. I'm ready for Winds of Winter. I'm sure that'll come out in 2027. We'll have you back in 2027 to talk about Winds of Winter when it comes out. Dave Benner.
Yeah. Thanks, Alan. Appreciate it.
Dave Benner, thank you so much for being on the show. Guys, we're going to run through them really quick. Blake, don't freak out.
I'm not.
I'm going to say them, but if they don't pop up,
if they don't pop up, we'll be okay.
Okay.
All right, let's try this.
It's facebook.com
There it is.
/TGS Alan Mosley. Twitter is @Alan M. Mosley, but you don't have to do any of that because you can just go to our website, which is thegoldstandardpodcast.com.
Which is a zoom in on
You can support us on patreon.com /TGS Alan Mosley, as well as if you want to follow more from Dave, including his show, his books, his appearances, writings he's done for our friends at the 10th Amendment Center on Mises. I got published on Mises a couple times, so I mean we're basically at the same level. You can get all that at davebenner.com. Anything else?
Thanks again. Appreciate everyone watching, and keep posted.
That's right.
Blake, what did you learn in this week's episode?
I should have watched more Game of Thrones.
You should watch more Game of Thrones.
Because I totally didn't get the whole last 45 minutes.
Was it 45 minutes?
What's warg? What's the word warg mean?
Warg means
Warged.
through your mental power, you can kind of take control of an animal creature and guide them as if you were in their body. It's a nerdy thing. Don't worry about it.
Oh, yeah, y'all are nerds. So, nerds.
Well, so Sansa is actually Jean Grey in the X-Men movies. So she does. So they do that in Game of Thrones, but Sansa doesn't do that though.
Okay.
There you go. Now, I'm glad I cleared that up for you.
Thanks.
Guys, thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next week.